Hey everyone, ready to go deep? We're going to challenge some assumptions today, reveal some surprising truths using case studies and data,
Yeah, we're going to cover real estate, education, even crime.
all using this really cool book, Freakonomics, by Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner. Have you heard of it?
It's a classic. It really takes a different approach to economics, focusing on the hidden side of everything.
Exactly. It's not just like, typical financial stuff. It's about everyday mysteries.
Like, why do drug dealers live with their moms?
Yeah, or what do sumo wrestlers and school teachers have in common?
It's fascinating stuff. And Levitt himself, he said, I'm not a real economist. I don't understand the math.
That's funny coming from an economist.
But he says he just focuses on real world questions, like how do people get what they want?
That's a great way to put it. So speaking of getting what you want, let's talk about incentive.
Incentives. They're everywhere, shaping how we behave, how we make decisions.
And I think a lot of times we assume experts, people we trust for advice, that they always have our best interests at heart.
Right. We think they're looking out for us.
But Freakonomics shows that's not always the case.
Yeah, sometimes these incentives, they create conflicts of interest.
Conflicts of interest. Interesting. Do you have an example of that?
Yeah, like take California auto mechanics.
Okay, auto mechanics. What about them?
You'd think they'd want to fix every little thing on your car.
Makes sense, right?
But there was a study, and it turns out they actually overlook minor repairs.
Really? Why would they do that?
Not to be malicious or anything, but it's to encourage repeat business.
Oh, I see. So it's in their best interest to kind of keep you coming back.
Exactly. Build that customer loyalty, even if it means, letting a few minor things slide.
Wow, that's interesting. And I guess that kind of makes sense from a business perspective.
It does. Now think about obstetricians. But in areas with declining birth rates,
Okay, fewer babies being born.
studies show they're more likely to perform C-sections.
C-sections, which are, what, more expensive?
Yeah, more expensive than natural births.
So why would they do that if there's a cheaper option?
Well, their income, it's tied to how many procedures they perform.
So more procedures, more money.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a pretty stark example of how incentives can really influence an expert's behavior.
It is.
So what's the takeaway for us listeners? Should we be suspicious of every expert we meet?
Not necessarily, but understanding the role of incentives, it helps us become more informed. Like, what motivates this person? Do their incentives align with mine?
It's like a secret decoder ring for navigating all the advice and recommendations we get bombarded with every day.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. Now, let's shift gears a bit. Talk about how data can reveal some surprising truths. Freakonomics looks at real estate agents.
Oh, yeah. Whether they always act in their client's best interests?
Right, because you'd assume they would.
You hope so. They analyzed 100,000 home sales in Chicago, compared data for agent-owned homes versus homes they sold for clients.
Okay, so they're comparing how they handle their own properties versus their clients.
Exactly.
What did they find?
Agents kept their own homes on the market for about 10 days longer.
10 days longer.
Interesting.
And they sold them for higher prices.
So they were basically holding out for the best deal for themselves.
It seems that way, which makes sense if you think about how they earn their commission.
Right. The longer they wait, potentially the higher the price, the bigger their cut.
Makes you think twice about whose interests are being prioritized.
It does. And it just goes to show you that data can reveal what intuition and assumptions might miss.
Totally.
Now, speaking of challenging assumptions, let's talk about elections.
Elections. Always a hot topic.
We often hear that the candidate who spends the most money usually wins.
Right. Yeah, that's the conventional wisdom.
But Freakonomics says not so fast.
Right. They throw a wrench in that whole idea.
Yeah.
Really? So all those million-dollar campaigns are for nothing?
Well, not exactly. But a study of almost 1,000 congressional races found that campaign spending has a surprisingly minimal impact on who actually wins.
Wow, that's really surprising.
It turns out that a candidate's appeal to voters, their message, their policies, their charisma, that matters much more than just how much money they throw around.
That's actually kind of reassuring. It means elections aren't just a game for the rich and powerful.
Exactly.
So it's not just about buying your way into office.
Nope. And to really put things in perspective, Freakonomics compares campaign spending to something we all spend money on without even thinking about it.
Okay, what is it?
Chewing gum.
Chewing gum.
Mm-hmm.
Really? We spend as much on chewing gum as we do on electing our leaders.
It highlights how our perception of what's expensive can be skewed by, media coverage and just what we think we know.
That's fascinating. It really makes you think.
It does.
Now, let's step into a world that might hit a little closer to home for some of us. Education.
Education, the foundation of society.
Specifically, the high-stakes testing environment and the possibility of teacher cheating.
Oh, yeah. High stakes can lead to some, let's say, creative strategies.
Definitely. Freakonomics takes us inside the Chicago public school system. Schools there faced probation, even closure, based on test scores.
Wow, so the pressure was on.
Big time. And that kind of pressure can lead to some, well, less than ethical behavior.
So teachers were incentivized to cheat to save their jobs and their schools.
It seems that way. And they got pretty creative with their methods.
Like what? What did they do?
Some are pretty bold, erasing wrong answers, filling in the right ones. Others were more subtle, hinting at answers during the test.
Wow, like a real-life thriller, but how'd they catch them?
Researchers developed these really sophisticated data analysis techniques. They were able to detect unusual answer patterns, like blocks of identical answers, especially on the harder questions.
So they weren't just looking at individual scores, but at patterns within those scores.
Exactly. And they also looked for individual students who suddenly performed way above their usual level.
And then their scores would plummet the next year.
Exactly. A classic sign of artificial inflation. So they were able to identify not only the cheaters, but also the truly exceptional teachers.
Whose students showed genuine improvement.
Yeah. And the Chicago school system used this information to, fire the cheating teachers and support the effective ones.
Makes sense. Reward good behavior, punish bad behavior.
Exactly. And guess what? The next year, cheating rates dropped by over 30%.
Wow, that's impressive.
It's a testament to the power of data, not just to expose problems, but to create positive change.
It's not just about pointing fingers, it's about finding solutions.
Exactly. Speaking of unexpected findings, let's step into a world you might not think of when you hear data analysis.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it?
Sumo wrestling.
Sumo wrestling, really?
You'd think it'd be this, ancient tradition untouched by the data-driven world.
Right, all about honor and ritual.
But Freakonomics, they pull back the curtain and show that even sumo wrestling isn't immune to incentives and strategic maneuvering.
I never would have thought of sumo wrestling that way.
It's fascinating.
So what's the data say?
Well, sumo wrestlers, they operate within this really rigid hierarchy, and their ranking affects everything. Income, status, even their daily life.
So it's not just about winning a match. There's more at stake.
Way more. And this is where it gets interesting. Freakonomics focuses on the final day of a tournament, specifically matches where one wrestler has a 7-7 record.
Okay, 7-7.
And the other has an 8-6 record.
So one's kind of on the edge and the other's already got a winning record.
Exactly. Now the wrestler with that 7-7 record, they have a lot to gain from a win. Keeps them in the elite group, all those perks.
But the 8-6 wrestler, not so much.
Right. They've already secured a winning record. Their position is pretty safe.
So you're saying there's a possibility that maybe those 8-6 wrestlers might be, shall we say, encouraged to lose?
The data suggests just that. They found that 7-7 wrestlers win a disproportionate number of matches against 8-6 opponents, particularly on that last day of the tournament.
Wow. So it looks like even in a sport steeped in tradition, human behavior can be influenced by factors we might not expect.
Exactly. And it's data analysis that helps us see those hidden influences.
Powerful stuff.
It is. But ready for a lighter story, one that's kind of heartwarming and thought-provoking at the same time.
Sure. Lay it on me.
Okay, it involves this guy named Paul Feldman, the bagel man. He delivered bagels and cream cheese to offices.
That's delicious.
Right. But he used an honor system for payment. Just left a box and people paid what they owed.
An honor system? I'm surprised that even worked.
It did. He kept meticulous records and found that people were overwhelmingly honest.
Really? What was the honesty rate?
On average, 87%.
Wow, that's way higher than I would have guessed.
Right. But here's where it gets interesting. Paul's data revealed some really fascinating patterns, like smaller offices were more honest than larger ones.
That makes sense. Smaller groups, everyone knows each other, there's more accountability.
Exactly. And guess what? Good weather inspired people to pay more. But bad weather, especially around the holidays, that seemed to bring out people's inner bagel thief.
So people are more likely to steal a bagel when it's raining and they're stressed about holiday shopping.
It seems that way. The week of Christmas saw a significant spike in bagel theft. But then, on patriotic holidays, like the 4th of July, honesty went way up.
It's amazing how these seemingly random factors can influence our behavior.
It really is. And it just goes to show you that even something as simple as paying for a bagel can reveal something profound about human nature.
Our tendency towards honesty or dishonesty can be influenced by things we might not even realize.
It's all connected.
It is. Now let's delve into something a bit more complex, a concept called information asymmetry.
Information asymmetry, what's that?
It's when one party in a transaction has more information than the other.
So an imbalance of knowledge.
Right. Creates a power imbalance.
Got it.
Freakonomics uses this fascinating historical example. Stetson Kennedy. He infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan in the 1940s.
Wow, that's incredibly brave. Why did he do that?
His goal was to expose their secrets, to weaken their power through information.
So he was fighting information asymmetry.
Exactly. He learned their rituals, their hierarchy, even their secret passwords.
And then what?
He did something brilliant. He gave all this information to the producers of the Adventures of Superman radio show.
Wait, Superman battled the KKK on the radio.
Every night. Imagine kids all over the country listening to their hero taking down this hateful organization. It demystified the Klan, took away their power to intimidate.
That's an incredible example of how leveling the playing field with information can have such a powerful impact.
Information is power, and sharing it can be a force for positive change.
Absolutely. And this concept is still so relevant in the internet age. We have websites that let you compare prices for insurance, for flights, for everything.
Right, that information used to be so hard to get. Now it's at our fingertips.
Empowers consumers, makes things more transparent.
Exactly.
But information asymmetry can also be used in, well, less ethical ways.
Of course.
Freakonomics talks about those corporate scandals in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Enron, WorldCom, those kinds of companies.
Right. Manipulating information, hiding crucial details for personal gain.
Taking advantage of that information imbalance to deceive people.
It's a reminder that information can be a powerful tool, but it can be used for good or for bad.
It's up to us to be informed and to demand transparency.
Absolutely.
Speaking of deception, let's talk about online dating.
Online dating. The modern-day Wild West.
Full of exaggerations and, let's be honest, outright lies.
Especially when it comes to looks and income.
Freakonomics, of course, analyzed data from a popular dating site.
What did they find? Spill the tea.
Well, for starters, 70% of women and 67% of men claim to have above-average looks.
So everyone's a 10.
Pretty much, which, statistically speaking, is impossible.
Right, someone has to be average.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it just shows how people present themselves online, always trying to stand out.
Makes sense. It's a competitive market.
It is. And it's like real estate agents using flattering language to sell a house.
Highlight the good, downplay the bad.
Human nature at its finest.
I guess so.
Now let's move on to something a little more philosophical. The impact of names on a person's life.
Oh, interesting. We've all heard those stories, right? Like the brothers, winner and loser.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, do our names really influence our destiny?
Freakonomics digs into this question, specifically whether names perceived as, well, distinctively black can impact a person's opportunities.
That's a really important question to explore.
It is, and they introduce us to the work of this economist, Roland G. Fryer Jr. He used something called audit studies.
Audit studies, what are those?
They involve sending out resumes with identical qualifications but different names, like one with Deshaun, one with a Jake, you know.
So they're testing for bias in hiring based solely on the name.
Exactly. And the studies showed that resumes with black-sounding names received fewer callbacks.
That's really disheartening.
It is. But it's important to note that correlation doesn't equal causation.
Right, just because there's a connection doesn't mean one thing causes the other.
Exactly.
So a name like Deshaun might signal to some employers that the applicant comes from a certain background.
Which could lead to assumptions, even if they're unfounded.
It's like you never get a second chance to make a first impression. A name can create a bias, even if it's unconscious.
It can.
Now, besides job prospects, Freakonomics also looked at California birth certificate data
Oh, wow. What for?
to examine the relationship between names and socioeconomic status.
So, like, do certain names tend to be more common in certain socioeconomic groups?
Exactly.
Huh?
And they found that, yes, some names are more prevalent among families with higher incomes and education levels.
Makes you think about the aspirations parents have for their children.
It does. They even provide lists of high-end and low-end names, which is fascinating.
It is.
But again, we have to remember, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Right.
A name doesn't determine a person's destiny, but it can reflect the environment they're likely to grow up in.
And the opportunities they might have access to.
Exactly. Now let's talk about one of the most Well, anxiety-inducing aspects of life,
Yeah.
parenting,
Parenting, the ultimate test.
and the question that haunts every parent. How much do we actually matter in our kids' success?
Big question. What does Freakonomics say?
They introduce us to this massive study, the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study, or ECLS. They tracked over 20,000 children from kindergarten through 5th grade.
Wow, that's a lot of kids. What did they look at?
They went beyond just basic demographics. They looked at
Mhm.
parenting practices, like whether parents spanked their kids or read to them, took them to museums, all that stuff.
Trying to pinpoint those magic parenting techniques.
Exactly. But the results,
Mhm.
pretty surprising.
Really? What did they find?
Bad parenting, it definitely harmed kids, that's clear. But the impact of so-called good parenting, not as straightforward as we might think.
So maybe there's no magic formula.
It seems that way. The data suggests things like genetics, socioeconomic status, even the parent's own education. Those play a much bigger role than specific parenting techniques.
It's more about who you are than what you do.
In a way, yes. And get this. Some of the things we typically associate with good parenting, like reading to your kids, taking them to museums, those showed no correlation with higher test scores.
Well, seriously, you're telling me all those trips to the library were for nothing?
Well, not for nothing, they're still enriching experiences. But in terms of directly boosting test scores, the data doesn't support it.
That's wild.
One thing that did correlate with higher test scores, the number of books in the home.
Really? Just having books around makes a difference.
It seems that way. It's not just about reading to them, it's about creating an environment where they're surrounded by books and encouraged to explore.
So it's more about fostering a love of learning than drilling facts.
Exactly. Another interesting finding. Children of mothers who were 30 or older when they had their first child, they tended to perform better.
Maybe waiting a bit longer to have kids isn't a bad idea.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
But again, correlation doesn't equal causation. Those mothers probably, on average, had more education, more resources, which created a more advantageous environment for their kids.
Right.
Another surprise. Staying home from work until kindergarten. No positive impact on test scores.
So much for the stay-at-home mom advantage.
Exactly. It's a reminder there's no one-size-fits-all approach. What works for one family might not work for another. And that's okay.
So what's the takeaway for parents listening? Should we just throw our hands up in the air and give up?
Not at all. While we might not have as much control as we think, we still play a vital role.
So what can we do?
Freakonomics reminds us that love, support, those things are far more valuable than any parenting technique.
It's about being present, being supportive, showing them what it means to be a good person.
Exactly. It's not just about what we do as parents, but who we are as people.
Well said. Welcome back, everyone. Ready for more Freakonomics?
You bet. We're diving even deeper today.
Last time we were talking about incentives, how they can really drive behavior, even among experts.
And how important it is to understand those incentives.
Right, so you can make informed decisions. We also talked about how data can reveal these surprising patterns, like with real estate agents and elections.
Even sumo wrestling.
Oh yeah, don't forget the sumo wrestlers.
And who could forget the Bagel Man and his honor system?
That was a good one. But today, we're going even deeper into some of the most, well, thought-provoking concepts from Freakonomics.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Like what?
Well, let's start with something that's sure to spark some debate. The impact of names on a person's life.
Names. Really? I mean, we've all heard stories, like those brothers, winner and loser.
Right. Makes you wonder if there's something to this idea of names as self-fulfilling prophecies.
So did Freakonomics actually find any evidence to support that?
They definitely explored it, especially whether names perceived as distinctively Black could affect a person's opportunities.
That's a really sensitive but important topic.
It is. They highlight the work of this economist, Roland G. Fryer, Jr. He used something called audit studies.
Audit studies, what are those?
They're pretty clever. Basically, you send out resumes with the exact same qualifications.
Okay, same qualifications.
What different names?
Ah, I see where you're going with this. Like, one resume says Deshaun, the other says Jake, that kind of thing.
Exactly. To see if there's a difference in response rates from employers just based on the name.
Wow, so they were testing for bias in hiring.
Exactly.
And what did they find?
The study showed resumes with Black-sounding names got significantly fewer callbacks.
It's just, it's disheartening.
It is. But, as always, we got to remember, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Right, just because there's a link doesn't mean one thing causes the other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It could be that a name like Deshaun signals something to some employers about the applicant's background.
Maybe assumptions about their socioeconomic status.
Yeah, maybe. Which could lead to assumptions about work ethic, reliability, stuff like that.
Even if those assumptions are completely unfounded.
Right.
It's like they say, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. A name can create a bias, even if it's not intentional.
It can. Now, besides jobs, Freakonomics also looked at California birth certificate data.
Birth certificates, what were they looking for there?
They wanted to see if there's a connection between names and socioeconomic status.
So do certain names tend to be more common among, say, wealthier families?
That's what they wanted to find out. And it turns out, yeah, there are some patterns. Some names are more prevalent among families with higher incomes and education levels.
It makes you think about the hopes and dreams parents have for their kids when they choose a name.
It does.
But, as always, we got to remember, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Right. Having a certain name doesn't guarantee a certain future.
Exactly.
Okay. Ready to switch gears again?
Hit me.
Let's talk about parenting.
Parenting, the topic that keeps every parent up at night.
How much do we actually matter in our kids' success? The million-dollar question.
What does Freakonomics say about that?
They bring up this massive study called the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study, or ECLS, followed over 20,000 children, from kindergarten all the way to 5th grade.
Wow, that's a huge study. What did they look at?
They went beyond just the basics. They looked at actual parenting practices, spanking, reading, museums, all of it.
Trying to find those perfect parenting techniques, huh?
Exactly. But the results were pretty surprising.
Really? Spill it.
Bad parenting, yeah, that's definitely harmful, no question. But the impact of all that good parenting, not as clear-cut as we might think.
So maybe there's no magic formula.
The data suggests that things like genetics, socioeconomic background, even the parent's education, those play a much bigger role than any specific parenting techniques.
It's more about who you are than what you do, huh?
Kinda, yeah. And here's a real head-scratcher. Some things we think of as good parenting, like reading to your kids, taking them to museums, those showed no correlation with higher test scores.
Whoa, hold on. You're saying all those trips to the library, all those art exhibits, they didn't make a difference?
Well, not in terms of test scores, according to the study. They're still great experiences, but the data didn't show a direct link to better grades.
That's kind of mind-blowing.
It is. But guess what did correlate with higher scores?
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. What was it?
The number of books in the home.
Really? Just having books around makes a difference.
It seems that way. It doesn't even matter if the parents read to the kids, just having access to books had a positive impact.
Huh. So it's about creating that environment, that atmosphere of learning.
Exactly. Another interesting tidbit. Kids of mothers who were 30 or older when they had their first child, they tended to do better.
Maybe I should wait a few more years to have kids.
Well, again, correlation doesn't equal causation. Could be that those mothers were more likely to have more education, more resources themselves.
That makes sense.
Oh, and one more thing. Staying home from work until kindergarten. No impact on test scores.
So much for the stay-at-home mom advantage, huh?
It's like everything else with parenting, there's no one right answer. What works for one family might not work for another, and that's okay.
So with all this data challenging what we thought we knew about parenting, what are we supposed to do? Just give up?
Not at all. We still matter.
So what should we focus on?
Love, support, honesty, those things matter way more than any fancy parenting technique.
It's about being there for them, supporting their dreams, showing them how to be good people.
Exactly. It's about who we are, not just what we do.
Well said. So, ready for something completely different?
Always. Bring it on.
Let's talk about the economics of dot crack dealing.
Oh, okay. That took a turn.
Freakonomics doesn't shy away from anything.
So what do they have to say about crack dealing?
Well, they take us inside this Chicago crack gang. And what they found is that most of the low-level dealers, the ones on the streets, they weren't making much money at all.
Really? I always thought drug dealing was super lucrative.
It can be for the guys at the top, but for most of them, it's dangerous, and they're barely scraping by.
So why did they do it?
That's the question Freakonomics tries to answer. They dig into the data, look at the incentives, and it turns out it's often not about the money.
Not about the money. Then what is it about?
For a lot of these young men, it's about belonging, status, respect, things they might not be finding anywhere else.
It's a reminder that economic decisions aren't always rational. Emotions, social pressures, those play a role too.
Absolutely.
Okay, enough about crack dealing for now. What else do we have from Freakonomics?
Let's talk about information, specifically how it can be used to expose wrongdoing.
Oh, interesting. I'm all ears.
Freakonomics tells this incredible story about Stetson Kennedy. This guy actually infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan back in the 1940s.
Wow, that's brave.
It was. He wanted to expose their secrets, weaken their hold on society.
So what did he do?
He spent years gathering information. Rituals, hierarchy, even secret codes. Then he did something brilliant. He gave it all to the producers of the Adventures of Superman radio show.
Wait, Superman fought the KKK?
Every night, imagine kids all over the country listening to their hero taking down this hateful organization. It helped demystify them, take away their power.
That's amazing. It shows the power of information to fight injustice.
And it's a concept that's still so relevant today. Think about whistleblowers, investigative journalists, even everyday people using social media to expose wrongdoing.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in holding people accountable.
Absolutely. Now, for our final Freakonomics tidbit today, let's talk about something a little lighter. Online dating.
Online dating. The land of, shall we say, creative writing.
Exactly.
What insights does Freakonomics offer about the online dating world?
Well, they analyzed data from a popular dating site and found that exaggeration, even outright lying, is pretty common.
No surprise there, especially when it comes to things like looks and income.
Right. 70% of women and 67% of men claim to have above-average looks.
So basically, everyone's a 10.
That's what they're saying. Statistically impossible, of course.
Right, someone has to be average.
It shows how competitive the online dating world is. Everyone's trying to present their best self, even if it's not entirely accurate.
It's like those real estate ads, you know? Highlight the good, downplay the bad.
Human nature in action.
I guess so.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Freakonomics.
We have uncovered some hidden truths, challenged some assumptions.
From real estate agents to the drug trade, even parenting. And I think a big theme that's emerged is, well, how data can change how we see the world.
Yeah, it's like this whole new way of looking at things.
So for this final part of our deep dive, I thought maybe we could just take a step back and kind of reflect on some key takeaways. What do you think?
Sounds good to me. It's a lot to process, all these insights from Freakonomics.
It is. So if you had to pick one overarching theme, what would it be?
For me, it's the importance of questioning everything.
Questioning everything.
Yeah, like don't just take things at face value. Dig deeper. Look for those hidden incentives. Challenge the conventional wisdom.
It's about being skeptical. Right. Thinking critically.
Exactly. And being open to the possibility that, you know, things might not be what they seem.
Like that saying, there's more to it than meets the eye.
Exactly.
Freakonomics encourages us to, well, use data, but also to remember that data is just one piece of the puzzle.
Right. We can't forget about the human element. Emotions, motivations, all those things that drive our decisions.
And sometimes those decisions aren't always rational.
Definitely not.
But that's what makes it so fascinating, right?
Totally.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Freakonomics, what's one piece of advice you would give our listeners?
That's a good one. I'd say be curious, be skeptical, and be open to the possibility that the world is way more complex and interesting than we often think it is.
Embrace the mystery.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our Freakonomics adventure.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We hope you've learned something new, or at least started to see the world a little differently.
And keep questioning, keep learning, keep exploring. There's always more to discover.
Until next time.